Now I would like to invite Yancy Molnar up to the stage to moderate our next panel on UMCA from a private sector perspective. Yancy, we welcome you and the speakers to the stage.
So we have a great panel, two in person and one via digital. Beth Burke, and hopefully she'll be on in a second. But maybe as we wait for Beth to get on. So we heard from congressional staff, from a member of Congress, from the Canadian embassy. Now we're going to hear from the private sector, and I would say this is the best panel. I have to say that, right? Because these are the people that really spend every day on this issue. Some of the government folks have many issues to work on. In the private sector, we have many issues globally to work on. But Sergio and Beth, Lauren, they're spending every day on USMCA. So I think we're really going to dive deep into where things stand. So to my left is Sergio Gomez Lora. He represents the Mexico Business Coordinating Council, CCE, here in Washington. CCE is the unified voice of the Mexican private sector. Sergio's been at this for many decades. I could say that because I've been doing it for just as long, Sergio, sorry. And he's a true North American. He's Mexican, living in Washington, that got his degree from Canada. So what better speaker? Beth, all right, there she is. Hey, Beth.
Hi.
Beth is the CEO of the Canadian American Business Council, the leading nonprofit organization advancing cross-border business and policy engagement between the U.S. and Canada, representing both Canadian and American companies. She also has a long distinguished career serving in both the executive branch as well as Congress. She's a native of Wisconsin, which she notes in her bio brings sensibility and pragmatism, so much needed today. And our third speaker is Lauren Mandell. Lauren is a partner in WilmerHale's international trade, investment, and market access practice. He helps companies and governments navigate a broad range of issues related to trade and investment. Prior to joining WilmerHale, Lauren served at USTR, where he negotiated the investment chapter of USMCA. So really, three outstanding experts. I'm going to first turn it over to Sergio to give us sort of a little scene setting from the Mexican perspective.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Yancy. It's a pleasure to be with you all today. Good afternoon to everyone. So if I would need to summarize what are the issues that we are, or the three or the two governments are discussing at the moment on the review, and I say two because for the moment these conversations are limited to Mexico and the US. I would put them in three baskets. Number one is 232 tariffs. You might be aware this is a service as well, but in the world of trading goods, USMCA goods were exempted from the IEEPA tariffs and from the 122 tariff. So USMCA survives, and USMCA is alive and kicking in the sense that most, and I underline, most of the goods that we trade with the US, both Mexico and Canada, if we comply with the rules of origin, we have free trade. But there's an exception to that, and that exemption is 232 tariffs. And in the case of Mexico, it means 30% of our exports. So autos, steel, aluminum, copper goods, these products have tariffs. And that means that 30% of Mexican exports, I won't speak for Canada, but I think it's a little lower than that, but also are important, cannot benefit of the agreement. So that's number one topic, and I think that's the same for our Canadian counterparts. We are very aligned on that one. Second topic is related to non-tariff barriers. As you know, the USTR has put together a list, a famous 54 asks list that they presented to Mexican government, where they are requesting to modify a group of measures implemented by the Mexican government that, in the eyes of the USTR, establish barriers either to U.S. exporters to Mexico or to U.S. investors in Mexico. So that's topic number two. I have to say that there's a lot of progress made there. I think some of the issues have been tackled already and addressed. Not all of them, but a big part of them. I think a good example is IPR. There were a major list of concerns on the U.S. side. And I have to say that this list comes from the private sector. It's basically the U.S. private sector that has shared its concern. And we as Mexican private sector, we also share some of those concerns. So that is moving forward, but that's the second part of the discussion. And a third one has to deal with strengthening North American supply chains through two tools. And that has to deal, as you might imagine, with President Trump's agenda of bringing more manufacturing to the US. We see it as bringing more manufacturing to the region. And what basically the idea there is that using two policy tools, the rules of origin on the one side, and on the other, tariffs to third countries in North American economies. So that would mean Mexico and Canada, also establishing a tariff, most importantly, to non-market economies in their imports into our own territories. So those are the three major issues that are now on the table under the review, Yancy.
Great. Thank you, Sergio. Very clear. Beth, I'll turn it to you from a Canada perspective. I don't know if you heard Deputy Ambassador Gloucester's remarks,
Yes.
but pretty staggering numbers he put forward, a strong case for USMCA. But what is the private sector view?
Yeah, he did share quite a few numbers that I actually had sort of ready at my fingertips as well. I guess, we are both very focused on how important this relationship is. And if Sergio gave a very clear picture, mine is more of a cracked crystal ball, maybe clear as mud as to what's happening right now with the Canada-US side. I mean, look, there's very clearly a list of issues that need to be worked through in the Canada-US side, but the negotiations or conversations are just at a very different place. They're not where we want to be or where we expected to be right now. But I'm always hopeful because at the end of the day, getting to the end game of a renewed USMCA is the goal. So while the process may not be exactly what we expected or hoped right now, if we get to the end and we land this plane and we have a renewed USMCA, then that's all that really matters. I think there, are a longstanding list of issues for both sides. Sergio spelled it out very well that the tariffs are a really big problem, especially the sectoral ones for the 232s. But there's a lot that's working well, right? We still have the USMCA compliant carve out, which has been, covered about 86% of trade between Canada and the United States. There was a mad scramble for more people to fill out their paperwork and get to the compliance rate. So that was a good thing and helpful. And I think there's lots of opportunities within these conversations. And I look forward to diving into all of that. But seeing as I'm virtual and it's a little bit less clear, maybe I'll leave it there and respond to some questions.
Great. Thanks, Beth. Lauren, how about a U.S. perspective as a former negotiator, although not necessarily a negotiation, but maybe it is. Maybe you could clarify that. I think the press release that came out from USTR and the Mexicans did have the word negotiation in there. So where do we stand?
Thank you very much, Yancy. If Sergio's take is crystal clear and Beth's take is clear as mud, I think my take is in between, some muddy aspects and some clear aspects. I was on a panel here a year ago talking about the USMCA, and at the time, the mechanics of the process and also the substance of the asks on all sides felt fairly vague. And now we're about 2 months out, and I'd say that the process and also some of the substance also still feels somewhat uncertain. I think zooming out for a moment on the mechanics of this process and the question of, is this a review? Is it a renegotiation? Is it something else, some other Frankenstein creature? The USMCA agreement says almost nothing about what the parties are anticipated to do in this process and also the time frame. There are 2 paragraphs in a 3,000-word agreement. We know that on June 1st of this year, 30 days out of the 6th-year anniversary, the 3 parties are expected to make what is called in the agreement recommendations regarding the agreement, which I think we all interpret to mean changes, modifications to the agreement. That's on June 1st. And then on July 1st, everyone knows the 3 trade ministers of Mexico, Canada, and the United States are expected to come together and meet and to review those recommendations and also answer the question of, do we want to continue the agreement for another 16-year term? I hadn't remembered this detail, but there is another wrinkle that if the 3 sides do agree to continue, that there needs to be a written agreement signed by the heads of government. That's the language. But that's all it says in terms of the process. And I think that's part of the reason that we stand here now 2 months out with a lot more questions than answers. I think on the question that you posed, Yancy, of how do we frame this? Is it a negotiation or not? Certainly, the joint press release from the U.S. and Mexican side after Ambassador Greer's visit to Mexico City 2 weeks ago, it not only said that this is a negotiating round, but also said this is the first negotiating round. My understanding is that this first round is focused on rules of origin, issues around economic and national security. I don't think anyone, at least I don't know anyone who knows if there will be a second round. Is this a phase 1 China negotiation, phase 2, some point in the indefinite future? Will there be a second round that immediately follows? But I do think the choice of language is significant, right? That it is a signal that this is a re-examination of the agreement. It is an effort to not just have a perfunctory review. It's an effort to negotiate to achieve better outcomes. I would say on the U.S. side, a heavy priority, at least, in my conversations around town, is compliance with the original terms of the original agreement, right? I was struck by the deputy ambassador's comments around Canada and digital, and I heard references, for example, to the source code provisions in that chapter, which are gold standard, provisions around data flows and data localization. I didn't hear references to non-discrimination, which I think for many companies in the room remains a very substantial issue. Here, thinking about not just DSTs, but C11, C18. I think on the Mexico side, concerns around compliance are also significant, including for some companies in this room around electronic payment services, for example, where effectively U.S. EPS suppliers still cannot process domestic transactions using their rules, their procedures, their protocols. And so I think those issues are very important. And again, I think in this renegotiation, you'll see efforts to achieve compliance with these terms and hopefully improvements as well. And then this whole process that we're having is, there's understanding, I think, in this room that the USMCA, win, lose, or draw is not going to go away on July 1st. But there's another provision in the USMCA, and that is the withdrawal provision that I know many of our clients are very focused on, that the idea that the United States could decide with 6 months' notice to withdraw from the agreement. And if that happens, will it be a negotiating tactic on the U.S. side? Will it be a negotiating tactic that becomes something more than that? Those are the sorts of questions that I know many are focused on.
Thanks, Lauren. Very helpful. Sergio, I won't get into the withdrawal issue. Let's dive a little bit deeper into the end of the month when the negotiating session is going to take place. What and there's also this discussion of protocols and separate protocols. What do you see as a best case outcome from the end of the month? What would you like to see succeeding from those discussions at the end of this month, leading into July 1st?
Yeah, so you mentioned the protocols, and I think that's very important. In order to understand what can happen on the 25th, I think we should try to understand what the goal is for July 1st. So I would say July 1st will not get a renewal of the USMCA, and we will not have a withdrawal. I think what we can expect for July 1st is some kind of announcement that we are moving forward, that we are improving the agreement, and that we are on the right path. So the instrument that the USTR has proposed to move forward, the legal instrument, is a protocol. And there are several reasons for this. One is there's no will into going to Congress. So wherever the result of the review is, it should be on the eyes of the US government. And I think there's alignment there also on the Mexican side, I'm sure on the Canadian, that the results of this process will not need to go to US Congress. So, and I know there's a strong debate here in Washington, and I'm not a lawyer, so I'll not get into that, what has to go and what has not to go. But I think the working assumption is if we don't need to change US law, then we don't need to go to Congress. And the rules of origin, for example, can be modified and have been modified in the past without US Congress. So then no withdrawal, no renewal. Ideally, it's ambitious, a protocol by July 1st. It's ambitious because some discussions regarding these rules of origin and strengthening of the North American security are still green, immature. So I'm not sure that we will be able to get on July 1st to a text of a protocol. But I think people are trying to, and you know how the negotiation works. You have to establish a deadline, everybody tries, and then you miss the deadline and you get another one. But if then considering that as the context, I would say that and there has been a lot of discussion on 232. There has been a lot of discussion on non-tariff barriers. So I think the area which needs more focus is rules of origin. And in there, I see concentration focusing in a small group of sectors, the ones that are more relevant to bilateral trade, where you see the concentration of the bilateral flows, and where there is an important presence of non-market economy inputs. I think there is a goal, which is reduce vulnerability on key inputs from other regions. So that would be part of the conversation. So I would expect some discussion there, ideally some text, if not getting very close to have text discussions soon.
Great. I might follow up on that, Sergio. So Beth, any reactions to anything Lauren and Sergio said, on the protocol issue, on where Canada stands? And also, Prime Minister Carney, his polling is very strong. So, Canadians want and expect him to stand up to the United States. He has done that. So how does he balance that pressure with the need to actually get a deal done?
Well, I think that every country expects their leader to stand up for them, right? In any sort of negotiation or conversation. The way I look at it is it's not necessarily standing up, but like getting a deal and getting a win for Canada is all sort of the same. And I think that's very important, right? Securing the best outcome so that we remain globally competitive in all three countries. Strength is defined by results, right? Jobs, stability, growth. Outcomes like that tend to come from disciplined, pragmatic engagement. And, while it's not very clear where things are in the conversations, I know that there are engagements and discussions between Canada and the United States. They are not to the negotiating word yet, but I think there is best efforts to navigate how to move forward because this is so important to businesses that operate on both sides, all sides of the borders. We are determined as the business community and at the CABC to help smooth the ground and soften the ground to getting to the right place on this because it's so critical. One of the things I talk about all the time is business is going to continue just by the nature of our geography and the integrated nature of our supply chains and the way our businesses currently operate. So the question is, are we going to do it seamlessly with less barriers and more profitable for everybody all around, or are there going to be complicating factors in the way? I think we can all attest to the fact that we want to get to a place where the deal continues to work, that the USMCA continues to foster this growth. So while it may seem complicated right now, I have faith that the voices in this room and at in all the private sector angles are speaking to how important this is to continue to grow our businesses.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Lauren, I have to ask you about investment. You were an investment negotiator during the original USMCA negotiations. Ambassador Lighthizer made his views very clear on investor-state dispute settlement in particular. He was not a big fan of that. However, there have been many developments with respect to investment since USMCA has been negotiated. You've had concerning judicial reforms in Mexico, which has created a higher level of uncertainty for investors in Mexico. You've also seen an increased focus on national security and tied to investment, whether it's critical minerals or other sectors. So what do you think the current goals are for the U.S. government in particular, but maybe also Canada and Mexico as you know it?
Thank you, Yancy. I do want to make one comment on July 1st very quickly, and then I'll turn to the more fun topic of investment. Actually, maybe A and a B. The A point, and this is responding to points that Sergio and Beth made, I do think that while a sort of complete deal that resolves issues amongst the three parties and results in renewal of the agreement for 16 years at this point does not seem likely before July 1st. Ambassador Greer has indicated that. I do think it's not unrealistic to hope for some sort of early harvest or confidence building deal. The parameters of that deal, I think, are probably apparent on all three sides. On the Mexico and Canada side, some sort of relief with respect to 232 tariffs. On the U.S. side, whether on rules of origin or actions to prevent non-market economies from taking advantage of the USMCA. There's a lot there where the three parties, I think, probably see common ground. The other point I want to make, the 1B before I get to investment, is the process doesn't necessarily end on July 1st. And I don't mean that it could go into July 1st of 2027, but rather the three governments are in control of this process. And so if on July 1st, they're making progress, if not on a final deal, but on something less than that, there's nothing in the agreement that prevents those parties from continuing to talk. Hopefully this doesn't go on, Labor Day, et cetera, but you could imagine a continuing dialogue between the three parties to get to a yes on some sort of understanding. Where does the investment fit into this? You took the words right out of my mouth, Yancy, that there's been a lot, I think, on the ground changes between the U.S., Mexico, and Canada. You have some changes that when we were negotiating the agreement that I think were anticipated. And here I'm thinking about on energy, for example, where the sort of AMLO, Scheinbaum efforts to push U.S. and foreign companies out of electricity, out of oil and gas was not unanticipated from the negotiating perspective. But I think what has been less anticipated is, of course, the judicial reform that you mentioned, which really puts into question the independence of Mexico's courts for Mexicans and also for foreign investors. The actions by the Mexican tax authority, by the SAT, certainly in services sectors and in insurance, but really across the board, in an effort, it seems, to meet a sort of dire fiscal situation in Mexico. There have been other changes. I think that some anticipated, others less. The surge of Chinese investment into Mexico is certainly a factor. In my view, I think when you look at this, you see reasons why this administration may want to take a close look at some of the limitations in the investment chapter in the USMCA, mainly on the dispute settlement side, on the ISDS side, or on the state-to-state dispute settlement side. I think the administration is open to the conversation on services and on energy, on mining, extractive, less so on manufacturing, where there are, Ambassador Greer, I think, has the same concerns of Ambassador Lighthizer with respect to the movement of manufacturing jobs into foreign jurisdictions. But I think there is an opportunity for a discussion. I think one of the questions for companies in the room is what level of priority do they place on pushing for these changes? That's a critical question, I think, for kind of across the board. And the other question is what specific changes are viewed as useful for companies and also viable from the US perspective and also from the perspective of our Mexican counterparts. I don't anticipate a lot of change between the US and Canada, we'll see. But I think the lowest hanging fruit is, and this connects to my comment about the Mexican judicial reform, that there is a requirement in the USMCA investment chapter for most investors, if you're going to use investor state dispute settlement, you have to litigate your claim in Mexican court for up to 2.5 years. And that requirement seems very stark and a little bit different than it maybe did 6 years ago. And so is that something that industry would want to re-examine and cause USTR to re-examine as well?
Thank you. So we're getting a hook because it's lunchtime. I'd like to thank the panel. So we've had Congress, we've had the private sector, we've had Canadian government, and then we're going to have USTR. So I think CSI has done a great job putting together a great program. We have beaten USMCA to death, and now it's ready to be renewed, right? Right. All right. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.